Colossus is the most advanced lineup optimizer in daily fantasy sports. Lock and exclude players. Adjust player exposure to reduce risk of injury or poor performance. Customize individual projections or upload your own projections. Generate hundreds of optimal lineups in seconds. Name and save the best lineups. Create winning lineups for the top sites like DraftKings and FanDuel for free at dailyfantasycafe.com.
Hello and welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42 here talking about some MLB action for Monday night. Obviously NFL weekend not quite over yet, but for those of you, maybe you don't have guys in the Monday night game, maybe you do have guys in the Monday night game, but you want some extra action. It's a pretty nice slate. Not a lot of great options, but definitely a lot of guys that I like. It's Clayton Kershaw Day, and if you ever thought that you saw the biggest favorite before, this is the biggest one I've ever seen. Clayton Kershaw listed as minus 360 favorite. So that's quite possibly the biggest favorite I've ever seen. I'm pretty sure it is. 6-run total, there. Against Colorado. We know Colorado awful against lefties. Colorado also awful on the road. And Clayton Kershaw not only happens to be the best pitcher in baseball, but has been absolutely incredible over the past month. Posting a 37% strikeout rate, an xFIP of below 2. Swing strike rate of 17.1%. All signs point to Clayton Kershaw tonight. You've got to play Clayton Kershaw if you ask me tonight. I don't think there's any way around it. There are some weather concerns, but it looks like the rain's later. Monitor that situation as the day goes on. But it looks like Clayton Kershaw, if there's no rain, since serious rain concern as far as a delay early in this game, then I can't imagine any possible way that I don't play Clayton Kershaw in cash games. I've got some options for you, though, for your second pitcher, because obviously Clayton Kershaw, $15,500 is expensive. I'm looking at Logan Verrett. He's only made one start so far this season, been coming out of the bullpen, but that one start was an absolute gem. At Coors Field, 8 innings pitched, 4 hits, 1 earned run on a solo homer, 8 strikeouts, 7 ground ball outs. He threw 93 pitches, so you don't have to worry much about, maybe him being on a pitch count or things of that nature. But at $4,100, you can get him and Clayton Kershaw for less than $20,000. I imagine a lot of people will be going this route, and it's not a bad way to go either. He's facing a Miami team that's one of the worst offenses in all of baseball, and he's a minus 180 favorite and a 7.5 run total. So I think that makes the most sense of who to pair with Kershaw, but I'll give you some other options as well, guys, that I'm looking at. Another interesting one, Carlos Carrasco is a guy you can consider, but he's almost $11,000. Kansas City, as we know, strikes out less than any other team in baseball, so he's a tournament option, but not one that I'm going to have a lot of. They put the ball in play a lot. He does have some issues at times. He's a guy that keeps the ball on the ground well. He misses bats, but they just don't miss many pitches. So at that price tag, I'd much rather just pay up for Kershaw. I know it's a huge amount more, but for me, it's easily that. If I'm paying for a guy between 10 and 11K, it's going to be Cole Hamels against Houston. Houston is a better team against lefties than they are against righties, but still striking out a lot against left-handed pitching, over 22%. Cole Hamels is a guy who has not allowed a home run over his last 5 starts. He's done a great job keeping the ball in the park there. He's missing some bats. He's got a 13.2% swinging strike rate over that same span over the last 30 days. And he's not giving up any hard contact, 20.8% lower than Kershaw throughout that span. So he's my second option if I'm going off of Kershaw in tournaments, but I'll likely just be pairing these guys with Kershaw and trying to find some value. You can look at guys in the Seattle game, Garrett Richards and Taijuan Walker, both guys in play. Seattle hits righties better, but Garrett Richards is a better pitcher than Taijuan Walker. I think Taijuan Walker is an okay option against an Angels offense that continues to struggle, but he's been nothing but boom or bust recently. We're talking negatives, upwards of 30 at a 45-point outing. He's a guy that is very, very inconsistent, but he has good stuff. So not a bad matchup for him. I don't mind looking his way just a little bit. And then outside of that, you can look at a couple other guys. Scott Kazmir against Texas. We know Texas much better against righties than lefties. Kazmir's been okay recently, $8,700. I think he's the last guy that I'm really looking at on this slate. These other guys are all too risky for me, and I likely will have Kershaw paired with somebody in each of my DraftKings lineups tonight. Looking at catchers, it's Buster Posey for me if I'm paying up. Easily the top option if you ask me. $4,300 against Kevius Sampson, who has been god-awful against lefties at $428. Well, obviously Buster Posey being a righty, Kevin Sampson hasn't been great against righties either. 3.26 WOBA, ERA north of 7. So definitely a guy that is, I guess, a little bit unlucky against righties. But I mean, this guy's not been good against anyone. I expect the Giants to do a lot tonight. Buster Posey kind of leading the way there. Other guys there. If Stephen Vogt is back in the lineup, I like him as a tournament option, but it doesn't look like he's on the right side of returning. So you can look at his teammate Josh Phegley. I prefer him against. You love him against lefties, actually. John Danks there, $3,200. So John Danks, he's that guy that's frustrating everyone. He was awful against righties. Still isn't great, 355 WOBA allowed, but definitely a guy that can be beaten. And Phegley's got a ton of power against lefties there, and especially away from O.co at U.S. Cellular. I think he's a great option. Travis d'Arnaud is another guy to look at. He's $4,800, though, more than Posey. Facing off against a lefty and Nicolino. I think that's a fine swerve play there as well. Derek Norris is an okay option against Jeremy Hellickson, his reverse splits at 3,200, but it's not a guy that I love. If you look down to me, you could probably find a guy in a decent spot like a Matt Wieters at 2,900 if he's in the lineup. I prefer him slightly from the left side, but Eduardo Rodriguez has been very hit or miss, hasn't been very good on the road. And then, of course, another guy who's been hitting the ball well recently should be in the lineup with a lefty on the mound again. JP Arencibia at $2,600, probably my favorite punt there. First base options. I love David Ortiz against Kevin Gausman. Gausman actually been pretty good against lefties. A WOBA less than 290 at 288 on the season. But David Ortiz just been absolutely on fire. 19 home runs in his last 50 games. The guy's mashing the ball. I love him. Miguel Cabrera, it's $5,400. I mean, tournament-only option really hasn't been very good recently. Nowhere near what we expect out of him. Your other options there, if you're looking for cheap guys, Victor Martinez, once again, just continues to be not very good recently. He's only $3,400, though, against the righty. I don't think that's a bad punt for you there. Other options, Brandon Belt. I mentioned Kevin Sampson being terrible against lefties there. $4,300 for Brandon Belt. I think he should be a popular play tonight. I think he's a great cash game play there as well. And other options at your first base position, I'm looking at Mike Napoli as a cheap option. We know that Napoli hits lefties well. Scott Kazmir is a good lefty, but Napoli does have that track record of success. $3,400. It is in Texas, so nice ballpark there for you as well. One more guy here, Adrian Gonzalez, nice and cheap, $3,800. Facing it, Sonny Gray. You don't love the matchup because Sonny Gray, obviously, a fine pitcher in his own right, but cheap option there at $3,800 if you need to save some money. I don't mind that because Gray has not been very good recently. So I'll definitely look that way just a little bit. And then outside of that, I'm sorry, not Sonny Gray. I'm looking at the wrong guy. Jonathan Gray is Adrian Gonzalez. So an even better matchup actually for him. Jonathan Gray actually has been pretty bad. 335 WOBA allowed to lefties. So don't get your Grays mixed up like I did. Obviously, Jonathan Gray going up against the Dodgers, and Sonny Gray going up against the White Sox. So with that being said, Jose Abreu is a guy I'm really not looking at a lot. I mean, he's been fine. He's been good against righties, but at $4,800, I prefer playing Ortiz at that price. Second base options, you know how I love Logan Forsythe against the lefty, and how can you not? His price continues to drop, $3,500. He had that huge performance a couple days ago. Seems like the Rays are facing a lefty every single night now. We're very close to it. So, obviously, Forsythe, he's first base and second base eligible. I don't know why you'd really play him at first base other than to be contrarian. But there are some other great options at second base. You got Brian Dozier against the lefty and Kyle Lobstein, who has just not been very good at all, allowing a 381 WOBA to right-handed batters. So, he's certainly in play. Anthony Rendon is another great option for you here against Aaron Nola. Aaron Nola has pitched well, but this is a Washington offense that has just absolutely smashed the ball recently. So Rendon, he's a secondary. He's a GPP option, not a guy that I'm playing in cash games. Guy you can play in cash games, it's fairly priced there against Jonathan Gray, is Justin Turner at $3,600. Second base or third base eligible. He's actually hit righties better than he's hit lefties this season. So doesn't need the platoon advantage there to be successful. I like that. Third base options, there's quite a few guys, but of course Evan Longoria stands out to me once again against the lefty. He's only $3,800. He's the guy you need in your cash games. Going to be popular, and rightfully so. Alex Rodriguez, another option for you. He's been hitting for some power. Rasmo Ramirez has not been great against right-handed batters at all this season. Danny Valencia is a great option for you there if you're trying to save a little bit of money, $3,800. But he's the same price as Evan Longoria, so obviously he's a GPP swerve. Not a guy I'll be playing in cash games. David Wright gets a lefty, and Justin Nicolino at $4,300. little bit pricey, but we know what this Mets offense has been doing recently. That's a great option for you there. Miguel Sano at $4,800, another guy to consider with some big-time upside, over a 250 ISO against lefties this season. And then the final guy, Andres Blanco. You don't love targeting Jordan Zimmerman, but at $2,100, third base or shortstop eligible. This is a guy that's on my radar as a glue. I mean, you're going to need cheap plays to get Kershaw in your lineup, especially if you're paying for a second pitcher, even in the mid-tier there. So guys like that are going to be really helpful in constructing your lineups. Definitely looking that way. Other shortstop options, I mean, if you're paying up, Carlos Correa, you love him against the lefty. You don't love him against Hamels. I mentioned Hamels has been very good recently. Doesn't give up a lot of hard contact, but that's the only kind of contact that Carlos Correa makes. So tournament option for you there. He's certainly in play, but not a guy that I love. Other options, another Rays bat as Drupal Cabrera, $3,300. I feel like I'm always talking about this guy since the break, but he's having a hell of a second half, so he's a guy you've got to keep on your radar there. If he's in the lineup, Tim Beckham at $2,500. Always a risk to get platooned out late in the game, but $2,500 for a guy that has a ton of power against lefties, against CC Sabathia, and his 381 WOBA and 23 home runs allowed to righties already. Certainly a guy you need to have on your radar. And then another guy who's been hitting the ball very well, Corey Seager, $3,500 for the Dodgers. He's had a couple huge games already. He had a 40-point game 2 nights ago on the 14th at Arizona. $3,500 for him against Jonathan Gray. Definitely got to give him a big hard look there at $3,500. Outfield options, Bryce Harper, if he's back in the lineup, that he says he's fine. $5,900 is expensive, and he's facing off against Aaron Nola, who, as I mentioned, has good stuff. Has been decent. 324 WOBA against lefties, not bad, but Bryce Harper obviously going to win that matchup more often than not. Yoenis Cespedes at $5,600. He's been hot. He's hitting everyone hard recently, up to 34 home runs now. I mean, you got to consider this guy against pretty much any pitcher in all of baseball right now. Other options, Lorenzo Cain, you can look at against Carrasco as a GPP option. I mean, this guy can hit anyone. Obviously, Carrasco, a good pitcher, and he's good against right-handed batters as well. Very good, actually, when you look at his numbers there. But just a 298 WOBA, but that's a guy that I love targeting when he's under the radar. JD Martinez against the righty and Tyler Duffy. He's in play certainly at $5,100, but you don't love the price tag. Mike Trout's at $47 against Taijuan Walker. I like that. Mookie Betts, in a righty-righty matchup against Kevin Gausman. I mentioned Gausman's been very good against lefties. He has not been very good against righties, 369 WOBA. So he's definitely the best Boston Red Sox bat, if you ask me, other than David Ortiz. And I don't even mind playing him over Ortiz if I have to choose one of the two, because better options at first base, or other options, I should say. Other guys to consider in the outfield, Matt Kemp continues to just be on fire. He's at $4,500, having a great second half. I like him as a tournament option. You can look at Jackie Bradley, mentioned though, prefer righties against against Gausman. Looking at Hellickson once again, Justin Upton at $4,400. He's a fine option. Adam Jones gets a lefty who's been very inconsistent. He's homered in 2 straight games, $4,300 for him. He is a very nice play there as well. Ben Zobrist against a righty. It's a good righty in Carrasco. I saved him for the outfield because there's a lot of second basemen I like. So he at $4,300 is certainly a guy that you consider. As we scroll down here just a little bit more, there are some other great options here. Danny Valencia, who I mentioned earlier, has outfield eligibility. Jacoby Ellsbury is only $3,700 against Erasmo Ramirez, so he's a guy you look at. David Peralta as a lefty against James Shields. While James Shields has been good this season, he's not been good against lefties. 370 WOBA and 19 home runs allowed. So David Peralta in the desert, certainly a guy that you need to have on your radar there as well. And looking at some other cheap options, I'm looking at some bats for Tampa Bay over here. You've got Steven Souza at $3,300 now that he's back up in the majors. You like him. Brandon Guyer is $2,600, another one of those guys that could be platooned out eventually. And Mikey Matuk, only $2,400. These are going to be the glue guys for me for most of my lineups with Kershaw, especially if I have a second pricey pitcher. So those are guys you definitely need to look at, because you're going to need those cheap guys to help you fit a $15,000 pitcher in your lineup. As we look all the way down to the bottom, there's really not a whole lot to like outside of those guys. I mean, you could look at one more guy. You could look at Jake Smolinski. He has had some upside, but I don't really like it at $2,000. If you need an absolute minimum guy, he's okay. Other guys that you can look at, if Shane Victorino is in the lineup, he's an okay option at min salary at $2K. Maybe he bats near the top of the order, but not a guy that you love there either. And one last guy here, if he leads off, Jason Bourgeois for the Reds at $2,200. Not a guy with a ton of upside, but a guy that certainly has a nice high floor, can steal some bases, score some runs there as well. That's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.